Hello, homesteading friends. Today I'm going to do a video on the basics of canning jam, basically the supplies that you will need, and a few little helpful tips, I hope. So I have, if you've seen my previous videos, I have a lot of plums coming ready right now. So I will today be making plum jam. So I started by going online. I often use a Ball Blue Book, which I highly recommend if you are new to canning. The Ball Blue Book is fantastic. But I just went online and I found this recipe for plum jam from Taste of Home that I liked. It has some orange juice in it, cinnamon on. I think it sounds really good. So that's what I'm going to try today. So I'm going to talk about some of the basics of canning and just encourage some of you, because I'm sure there's people out there that want to try canning and you don't have supplies. And if you have to go and buy everything new and think that you have to buy a ton of supplies, it can be a very expensive thing to get into. So some of the beginning things that you're going to need, of course, you're going to need jars. The nice thing about the jars is that you can reuse them. You can see this one has a label on it from 2022, and that label is covering another label that was on there before that. So if you don't give all of your jars away, which I do give many of mine away because I give a lot of my preserves and things away as gifts, then you would have to replace the jars. Otherwise, you can reuse them year after year. Ooh, that one's not very clean, so it'll have to be washed. So the most important thing is to have good jars. You want to check your jars. If you're getting them used from somebody, so in other words, maybe you're getting them on Facebook Marketplace or at a yard sale or something, and they're not new, you want to take your finger and you want to run it around the top of this jar. And you want to make sure there's no nicks, no chips, cracks, anything. It should be very smooth because you want to be able to get a good seal on it. So that's one thing that you're going to look for in your jars. I have a variety of them, and I also have lids over here and screw bands. Now, I know that if you read the Ball Blue Book and you read what they recommend, they will say that you can never reuse these lids. These are Ball, but I bought some that are no brand, or don't have a brand name on them. I've been canning for about 50 years. And I've used a whole bunch of different ones. So you can see they will say, first of all, that you should never, ever reuse these. But I am careful when I open mine so that I don't damage them, and I reuse them. Now you can see this one has a little bit of, I can get it to focus. There we go. A little bit of rust on this top part. This lid's obviously been used many times. As long as this rubber right here is good, like there's no nicks, there's no marks, there's nothing on it, and you can take your thumbnail and you can kind of feel it. And it's not like if it's a dry rot to it, then it wouldn't be good to use. But if that rubber is in good shape and there's no dents in your lid, you can reuse these. I have reused them for years. My family has reused them for years. I know this is my disclaimer. It is what I do. I'm not saying that you should or have to do that, but it is a possibility. The other thing is that they will say that you can never reuse jars that are like this, where it was a jar that probably had some kind of a jelly in it. But again, if you feel this lid and it's very smooth, there's no chips or cracks, and you go in here and you look at this rubber, because that's where it has to seal. And if that rubber all looks good and is in good shape, these obviously haven't been washed yet. I got to do that before I can. But if that rubber is in good shape, you will still get a good seal, and you can reuse those. I've done it for years, and many of my jars in my pantry I have. And I particularly like to look for jars like this because I think their lids are cute. Plus, if I can find something like this and I give it away, I don't care. Otherwise, I often give things away to my older children that now live in different states. And so when they're traveling, I will give away my screw bands because I don't like to ship a jar or have them travel with a jar that just, even though it's sealed, just has this on it. Because if something were to happen and that seal broke, then the food would spill in their vehicle. So if I give that to them, I often give them my screw bands, and then I don't get those back necessarily. So That's why I like these kind of jars, because I can give them away and not worry about if I get them back. And I also give them to neighbors and friends and things like that for gifts. And so another thing that you will need are these screw bands, and these get used over and over. Some of mine are very old. Once they start getting rust on them like this, they're not great because they'll leave rust marks on your jars. If you can still screw them on and get it really tight, you can use them. They're just not pretty. So oftentimes when they start getting like this, I will toss them and I will just purchase some new ones. So those are the basics. You need to have good jars, good lids, and your screw bands. Now, I'm today going to be making plum jam. So a few other things you can have when you can that is helpful to have. You'll want to, when you're canning, most of the time you want to have your lids. These are the lids. You want to have these hot because this rubber here, it's very important that it makes a good seal. So one way of doing that is to have that rubber be hot. So you have a saucepan, and generally what I'll do is I will take my lids and I will just toss them in there. Now I toss them every other one because otherwise I flip them over. So that's what I mean by every other one. So one is down and one is up. And I do that only because otherwise they tend to land right on each other and they seal that way, and it's a little harder to get them out. So I'll just toss my lids in there like that. And then I will put that on the stove. I'll bring it to a boil and then turn it down on low, just so that they stay hot. And one of the greatest little inventions that they have is this. It has a magnet on it so that you don't have to reach in that hot water. When you're ready to can, you can pick up your lid with this magnet and you're good to go. So it's not a necessity item to have. This is not, but it is very nice. The other thing that is great to have when you're canning is this is a canning funnel, and they're made specifically to fit in canning jars. So you can put it on there like that, and then when you're ladling your my jam or whatever salsa or anything that I'm making, when you're putting it in there, it gives you a nice funnel. Plus, the advantage of this is that it keeps that top rim of your jar nice and clean, because that is going to be key to having your jar seal. So I'm not going to get into the whole process right now. I'm just giving you some tips. So my jam that I'm making today calls for using a double boiler. Well, I don't have a large double boiler. I have a small one that I melt chocolate in and things like that, but I don't have a large one. So I'm going to just use 2 pots. Now, you don't want the pots to sit right directly together. So I have a silicone hot pad. So I just put that in the bottom, put some water, and then I'm going to put this other pot in here, and then I will put my plums and my sugar and my orange zest, everything that I need to make my jam, and this is going to be my makeshift double boiler. Now, many of you, if you remember, maybe your grandma or somebody else that did canning, and they had a big canner like this. You do not have to have that. All you need to have is a pot that is taller than your jar. Because this recipe for jam calls for putting it in a hot water bath, which this is a hot water bath. It is different than a pressure canner. All you would do with this is you fill it with water, put your jars in there so that the water is at least a ½ an inch over the top of your jars. And then you bring it to a boil and you keep it at a small boil, not a heavy-duty rolling boil, but just a low bubbling boil for 5 minutes. That's to make sure the jars and everything are hot. And so all you need, it's not being brought up to pressure or anything. So all you need is a pot that is taller than your jars. So if you're thinking, I would love to make some fresh strawberry jam or something like that to try doing it, you don't have to go and invest in a canner and all of those things. You need your jars, and all you need is a pot that is at least a ½ an inch taller than your jars. So technically, I could put these canning jars in that pot with a ½ an inch of water over the top of them and bring them to a boil for 5 minutes, and it would be a hot water bath just the same as this big one would be. So I just want to encourage you, if you're thinking about canning, you want to try something, and you think, oh, I don't have all the supplies, there are lots of ways around it. Now, something else that's very important is you never put your jars directly on the bottom of the pan that would be touching your stovetop. So you can see there's this little spacer thing. It's not even big enough for here, but it doesn't really matter. But I remember for many years, my mother didn't even have one of those, and she just used a dish towel, and she would put a dish towel in the bottom of there. You don't want your jars to sit directly on the bottom of your pot, because if they sit right directly where the heat source is going to be coming into the bottom of that pot, it could crack your jars, and you wouldn't want that to happen and waste all of that work and good food. So you need to use some sort of a spacer. It can be one like this, or like I said, you can put a dish towel or anything in there so that your jars don't sit directly on the bottom. The other thing that you're going to need is paper towels. As much as I try not to use paper towels, because I use a lot of other dishcloths and things like that to avoid the waste, for this I do use paper towels, and you could use a dishcloth, but when you put, so if I had my jam all cooked in here and then I were ladling it into my jars, when you get done, you have to make sure that this top is very clean. So I'll use a paper towel. I wipe that. I will feel it with my finger to make sure anything that might have a little seed or anything, there can't be anything up here on the lid. Then you put your lid that comes out of your hot boiling water. You'll take it out of there, put it on your jar. And of course you have to use oven mitts or a towel or something, because at this point everything's going to be hot. And then you put your screw band on really tight and then put it in your canner. And that's really all you need to can. This is a jar lifter. You can use these. You don't have to use these. When it says it needs to be in a hot water bath for 5 minutes, it means a minimum of 5 minutes. So a jar lifter you can use to go over the top of your jars, because of course when they come out of the canner, they're very hot. So you can't just reach in there and grab them. And you don't want to use, I've tried using tongs and other things, and it just doesn't work well. So this is a good secure jar grabber. But if you don't have one of those, another way that you can do it, and I've done this many nights, is when I finish canning, when the timer is up, I turn the stove off and I go to bed. And when I get up in the morning, that canner is cool and I can just use my hands to lift the jars out of there, and it doesn't matter. It can go longer than the time it says. You just can't go less than the time it says. Another little trick that I'll give, because of course I've talked about homesteading, and what I often do is I use my canner water. So if I use my canner tonight, say I make this jam, and when I'm all done, I use my jar lifter, I take my jars out, I'm still going to have a lot of boiling hot water in here, and that can be used for so many things. So I'll often grab something, because I can't lift this canner full of water, it's just too heavy, plus it's so hot. So I will use something else and scoop it out. And boiling water is a great drain cleaner. You can pour it down your bathroom sinks. It helps to, because it's boiling water, it helps to loosen all that gook. It also, if you have any problems with flies that like to nest in your drains, it will kill those off. The boiling water is also a great weed killer. So a lot of times I will scoop it out and I will just take it out and pour it in like the cracks on my driveway or the cracks in my sidewalk to kill the weeds without using any chemicals. So the boiling water, I use that as well if I can. So that is just my tips today. I'm getting ready to make this plum jam, so I will post pictures later after I have things going. Happy canning.